Let's get this sports podcast party started, all right?
The J Reels Podcast.
What is happening, my good people? Greetings. How are you? How's it going? How's everybody doing out there? What is the latest and greatest? Hope everybody's doing well, feeling fantastic, in excellent spirits. If it's entertaining, unfiltered, and unedited sports talk that you're looking for, well, there's no need to look elsewhere because I cover it all over the next hour plus here. So lock in and tap in, as this is the J Reels Podcast with your host, J Reels. For my first timers, welcome aboard. And for those who've been banging with me going back to the very beginning, somewhere in the middle, or even as early as this past Thursday, I welcome you guys and gals back. And I am not starting with the NFL. I am not starting with college football. You can forget about basketball and hockey as of right this moment. If there was anything that was going to overtake even the shield, the impenetrable one, as I've said time after time, as we know, football swallows up everything when it comes to the sports landscape, especially here in this country. But I am not ESPN. I am not Fox Sports. I am not any of these other podcasts or other sports shows, because even if you watch First Take, what do they start off with? The Chiefs. As far as them towing the line of winning these games, pulling it out of their rear end and teetering on the brink of destruction. And I'm not that guy. I am not going to be Shannon Sharp or Rex Ryan or Molly Karam, and I don't want to shout them out in particular, but you're not going to get NFL to start off this podcast. And yes, everybody knows how much I'm a huge Met fan, and with the news coming out last night as far as Juan Soto, and you know that's where I'm beginning. There is so much to unpack, not only with him, this process, and this signing, but even now everything after that. As we now take a big, deep, giant breath. I know for those who root for the blue and orange, and for those who rock the navy blue with the pinstripes, I know that they are crying in their Cheerios this morning, and I'm going to get to all of it. So, for starters, $765 million, 15 years. Am I a happy Met fan this morning? I guess you could say that, but here's the thing. There's so much to uncover here when it comes to what this team is going to do and what this team now has to really set their sights on. So yes, we could talk about the contract and how exorbitant it is and how it's just completely outrageous, something that we thought we would never see after what we witnessed last year with Shohei Ohtani. And even he's not worth $700 million, despite the fact that he's not only a DH, but he also pitches, which a lot of people are going to look forward to seeing this year, barring everything is on track and on schedule for him to toe the rubber as a starting pitcher for the LA Dodgers. But for Soto to get this type of money, and I understand a couple of years ago where the Nationals said here's 15 for $440 million, and he even thumbed his nose at that, which we thought was preposterous, because we said, wait a minute, I understand he's going to wait till he gets to his free agency year, but you're going to pass up on $445 million, which was more than what Mike Trout got as a member of the LA Angels when he signed, 12 for, I think, $436. So even at that point, we thought that Juan Soto was out of his gourd. But when you have Scott Boras as your agent and a guy that you know is going to get every last red cent from an organization and an owner, in this particular case, Steve Cohen and the Mets, that here it is, the richest contract in the history of professional sports. And this is only going to go to a guy that, as we all know, as dominant and as proficient of a hitter that we've ever seen. Now, is he Ted Williams? He is not. He only batted .288 last year, so this isn't a guy that's going to bat .330, .340, .350, although in the pandemic year he did hit .351, small sample size. But we know what he brings as far as his plate discipline, as far as that Soto shuffle, now going from the Bronx to Queens, as far as a guy who has as keen of an eye as we've seen since Barry Bonds, dating back to the latter part of the 1990s into the 2000s. And now that we have Soto in the mix there in Flushing under this just mind-boggling contract, despite the fact that he's not a good outfielder, not a good base runner, and you would think that you're going to give $765 million to a 5-tool player. And when you think about it, he's probably a tool player where he could hit for average and hit for power. Mind you, the 288 average this year. But now this is where it all gets kind of crazy when we look at the big picture here for the Mets. Forget about the money, because as everybody's going to say, well, it's not my money. Yeah, it's not your money until you go to the ballpark, because then that's what you're going to spend through the nose and out of your rear end when it comes to parking, concessions, tickets, etc. But for this very moment, when we look at this team and having your right fielder in tow for 5 years where he could opt out, and if he does opt out, the Mets could actually make the contract from $765 to $800 million, because he will get a $4 million raise throughout the rest of the contract. After that, he's getting $51 million a year on average throughout the course of the contract. But again, his salary will go up. You have to break down the parameters. This is all on average, people. But if he does opt out and for whatever the reason happens to come back in to the remainder of the contract, he will get in upwards of $55 million a year throughout the remainder of the final 10 years of what he signed for there, I believe last night, or maybe in the coming days when he'll go out to Citi Field to have the press conference, pomp and circumstance, etc. So now that you have your right fielder in place, how does the rest of this team unfold? We understand he means a lot to this organization because he is your face. I understand Francisco Lindor is probably going to be your heart and soul, maybe blood and guts, but when you're going to look at the yearbook and the media guide, his face is going to be front and center with Lindor flanking to the left or right of that. You don't pay a guy that amount of money in order for him just to be an afterthought or just to be a Robin to Lindor's Batman. And when you think about the numbers of this contract, he's getting paid more than $400 million more than Aaron Judge did, his former teammate, when he signed his deal 2 years ago, and Judge had an MVP season because Soto was in our lineup. So now that I segue into that lineup, is Soto going to be the guy that's going to carry this team? Soto, we know, has the power, he has the pop, but he's a guy that would, I don't want to say rather take a walk, but he's a guy that would try to draw a walk and hand a baton, as opposed to a guy that says, all right, get on my shoulders, get on my back, I'm going to carry you through a stretch of the season, or let's say through a postseason, to where he's going to be the man. And who knows how that Lindor-Soto relationship is going to be. I would think Lindor, he probably endorsed this once Steve Cohen got on the phone via text, or I would think by FaceTime, or maybe even in person for that matter, to say, hey, this is what we're going to do. And I'm sure Lindor signed off on it. And Lindor, you would think he's going to be that team guy. He's not going to put the ego at the door. He's going to put the ego at the door. He's going to check that to make sure that you're going to bring in a huge chip like Soto to your team, who is going to garner a lot of attention and a lot of pressure. And we'll get to that when we get to spring training. But we know that with the contract and everything that is going to be discussed from now until his first plate appearance at Citi Field next year, or even when they're on the road to start, it is going to be a spotlight unlike we've ever seen. But I would think that even with Soto, a guy that, I don't want to say he deflects pressure, or a guy that is going to be impervious to that, but you have to think, knowing that he's going from one side of town to the other, a town that has not won a World Series and going on 39 years, that all of the focus is going to be just pretty much in his locker, his position, his everything. Every move he makes in the city is going to be microscopic and scrutinized to the point where, not to say he's going to do anything crazy off the field, but we know that with the money and with the expectations is going to come that pressure. Without question. But I understand that's a discussion as we get for spring training. But when I try to take this 30,000-foot view of this signing and what it means, and now as I transition to this lineup, because I don't know if Soto's going to be that guy where he's going to put up those prodigious numbers. And of course he's going to hit 30 and 100, you would think. But he isn't an automatic in a regard where this lineup with Lindor and even with Vientos, a young player who I would think a lot is going to be expected on him to deliver based on what he did in the regular season, and obviously had that monster postseason. But what's going to happen at first base if Pete Alonso, is he going to come back considering the amount of money that was spent here? Now, factor in this. The Met payroll was freed up $179 million this past offseason, or these past couple of months, based on the contracts that were signed by Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander and a few others along the way. But now you've already tied $80 million of the $179, and would you still think about it, have $100 million to play with? If you're going to be anywhere in that $340 million stratosphere as the Met payroll was heading into last year, but with a lot of that money coming off the books, and now that you have 51 for Soto, 17 for Frankie Montas, although he has an opt-out after this year, and then Clay Holmes, who I'll get to in a little bit, signs a 3-year, $38 million, which you figure is going to be about 12 and a half. That's 80 right there. Where's the rest of this money going to go when you need starting pitching and more of it, not Montas or Clay Holmes, who's going to be transitioned to a starter? So that is a big, giant question mark. You still have big guys out there. I don't know if they're going to go for the Corbin Burnses or the Max Frieds. I don't know if that's going to happen. To me, and I said this before and I'll say it one last time, if I'm Steve Cohen, see what Walker Buehler wants. And I know he's going to want a big payday, and obviously he has a long history injury as well, but I'd rather take him considering that he has guts, he has heart. We saw what he did in the World Series and even in the playoffs against the Mets, 4 innings. And yes, he had to battle throughout those 4 innings in order to get to a point where they were in good stead for the Dodgers to win that Game 4. But all I got to say is this. Do whatever it takes to bring him in here, because at least you're bringing a guy who knows what it takes to win, especially a guy who's going to be a part of your rotation. Soto, we know, is a guy who won in Washington, and he had big players along the way, whether your name is Anthony Rendon or even a guy like Ryan Zimmerman, who was, I understand, long in the tooth in his Nationals career at that point, and even in San Diego, where Soto played with Machado and Tatis Jr., and we know with the Yankees with Judge and Stanton. But now that when we get to this lineup, yes, you do have Lindor. Yes, you have Vientos. But where else are they going to get another bat that's going to complement not only this lineup, but even Soto to get protection around the aforementioned shortstop and possibly first baseman by way of third base and Vientos? So they're going to need another at bat here. They're going to need another bona fide slugger in order to complement, to have any length in this lineup in order for the Mets to go to places where they haven't seen in quite some time. And I'm talking about going to and winning a World Series, not getting to the playoffs, not having a little run where you got to a championship series last year, which was unexpected, but now get to the dance and win it. So how's this lineup going to be put together here in light of this contract? And as well as the rotation and as well as the relief pitching, because as we saw, the relief pitching fell apart in October. The Phil Matons of the world. Guys like that we had to get from other places, but did not deliver in big spots. And the Reed Garretts, and I can go on down the list, the Jose Butos. Yes, we need to get that bullpen somehow, some way replenished. So you have that to deal with. So how I look at it is, am I happy with the signing? I guess you could say yes, but there's a lot of work to do. Bringing Soto in doesn't mean that there's going to be a championship parade up the Canyon of Heroes come next October up Broadway. I'm not satisfied as a Met fan. Is it a nice present under the tree, an early present? Absolutely, but one more time. Steve Cohen, David Stearns, you guys are still on the clock. It is not time to pop the champagne. It is not time to celebrate by any means necessary. The work has begun. And now you have to deliver here over the course of these next few weeks with the winter meetings in tow to see whether or not you could stabilize that rotation, upgrade that bullpen, and certainly see if Pete Alonso is going to be a guy that you're going to want to bring back, or another slugger out there that you're going to try to bring onto the team. You need a center fielder. Starling Marte is going to be gone. You may have to trade Jeff McNeil. There's still so much that needs to be done here. And yes, we could throw in Francisco Alvarez as far as a bat in the lineup, but you need more than that. If Alonso comes back, you would say, all right, great. Now we have a lineup. But until then, what is it going to be? So this signing was enormous by any stretch, but by any means, it is not time to put your feet up, Met fans, and think that everything is kaput, over and out. Now let me get to the Yankees, because I'm sure the Yankee fan today, they got to be sick. They also have to feel as if this doesn't happen to us. We never get outbid for a free agent. And then to the Mets of all teams. So you know the Mets are going to be major players, because that's what Steve Cohen had said upon him buying the team and him officially being the owner, that he was going to make these type of moves. And yes, we saw it a few years ago with Scherzer, Verlander, etc. And now he got the biggest fish out there. And for the Yankees, they have no ifs, ands, buts, maybes about to hang their heads here. Are they disappointed? Absolutely. Because the offer that's been reported that they put forth, 16 years and $760 million, to me, that's as good as it gets. And I'll be honest with you, I'm actually surprised Soto did not take that offer for this reason. All right, they gave him the extra year, a little bit less money, $5 million, big whoop. But you would think that, considering the camaraderie that he had with Judge and knowing that they just came off of a World Series appearance, and you would think from just Juan Soto, forget about Scott Boras, and we know Boras, come on, $5 million, you won last year. Yankees said, no, we'll give you one more year, but $5 million less. And I'm surprised that he said, you know what, I'm going to take the offer in Queens instead. Only because he knows what it's like to be in that Yankee locker room. He knows what it's like to be in pinstripes, and I'm sure he's been told about the history. The Mets, you don't have that. There is no comparison between the Met organization and the Yankee, or as far as the franchises go. Granted that the Yankees had a 60-year head start, but still, when you're talking about tradition, when you're talking about history, the Yankees slaughter everybody. That includes the Dodgers, that includes the Cardinals, that includes the Cubs, Red Sox, etc. But for whatever the reason, he said, the hell with it, I'm going to take the money. And if you're a Yankee fan today, I know you can't wait for those games in Yankee Stadium so you could boo the hell out of Juan Soto. And you know what? You have every right to. Because it's not as if the Yankees put up a $650 million offer, or their ceiling was at $700, where you could say, come on, $700, and the Mets went $765. You're going to skimp out here, blah, blah, blah. Yankee fans can't do that. Not this day, not this year, not this time. So they have every right to be angry. I'm sure they're like, good riddance, it's not my money, I don't have to worry about that. But now, as your Brian Cashman and Hal Steinbrenner, what are you going to do to not only rebuild your team, but build it to a point where you get younger, get more athletic, because you can't bring aging players onto this team. You're trying to get rid of those players. Soto was that guy, that young player that he is, but he's not really athletic, and we understand he's not a great fielder. So I'm sure maybe there's a little bit of relief in their regard, maybe not to the fan base to a certain extent, because the fan base can't be angry at their front office, but from the standpoint that they lost out, us, the Yankees, on getting the big free agent that the Yankees never seem to lose out on. And as a Met fan, I'm not trying to stick it to the Yankee fan. For what? I know that the back and forth, the sports fodder that it is to have a star like Soto go from the Yankees to the Mets, which we've never seen. And yes, it's easy to needle the Yankee fan today, but I'm not going to do that. Why? Because the Met fan needs to worry about their team. They can't worry about the Yankees. And I've never worried about the Yankees, nor their fans, unless they end up winning a World Series. As we all know, another winter I can sleep in peace. But for that, how I look at it is that the Yankees did what they had to do to try to keep Soto, and they should be walking with their heads held high this morning. And let's see how Cashman and company are going to put this team together. And that's the other fascinating thing about this. I understand it has nothing to do with the Mets, but considering I live in New York and what the plan B is for the Yankees here is going to be beyond intriguing. Because who are they going to bring in, whether via free agency or by trade? We know that Torres is gone. Who knows if they're going to cut bait on DJ LeMahieu? Obviously, Judge goes back to right field. Is Dominguez going to be your full-time center fielder? What's going to happen in left? I guess Verdugo, I believe he's a free agent. Maybe they're going to put Spencer Jones out there, two rookies to start out your 2/3 of your outfield. Who knows? They need a first baseman, no Rizzo. They need a left-handed bat in the worst way, even though Jazz Chisholm is that guy. But with Rizzo gone and obviously with Soto from one borough to the next, they need a left-handed bat in the worst way. So that's why, from that perspective, the Yankee offseason has now been ratcheted up even 10 times more because of Soto walking out the door. And all I can say is this, as someone who loves baseball and has watched the sport forever, and knowing that there's been that back and forth between the two organizations, especially their fan base, more so in the last year than ever, and now it's going to be at a fever pitch because it is almost going to be personal between these fan bases once we get through this period here of free agency, once we get to spring training and all the attention that Soto's going to generate between that, and who knows what the press conference is going to be, because you already know there's going to be a lot that's going to be said about Soto, thought process, etc. Did you think about the Yankee fan? Did you think about the organ? All that. And let's see how he answers that. But we may have, and even though there hasn't really been a rivalry, yes, it's been big brother, little brother, but now it's almost at an even keel because of what has happened here over the last 12 hours or so, depending on when you're listening to this, of course. So let's see. This, again, has so many different storylines, so many different angles, and how this is going to play out is going to be fascinating. But the Mets, they got their man. And now they have to put forth the rest of this roster in order for them to get to a level where they're going to win a World Series. Because right now, just bringing Soto aboard or on board, and even with Clay Holmes and Frankie Montas, you think that's enough? Not this Met fan. And what else can I say? That is it when it comes to Soto. Could be a podcast unto itself. Obviously, I got a lot of other things to get to, including the signing of Clay Holmes. I mean, really? Is this what we're going to do, David Stearns? Again, pluck another former Yankee, as they did with Luis Severino, who signed a 3-year deal with the A's, I might add. And he got a very handsome deal, 3 years, $69 million, the most ever guaranteed money that the A's have offered. And that was a complete surprise. Because with that team being nomadic from Oakland now to Sacramento, and although they cleared a final hurdle in Las Vegas to put forth a $1.75 billion stadium there in the desert, I believe on the site where the old Tropicana Hotel is, now that they've cleared that hurdle, let's see if they're going to start groundbreaking as early as, I believe, maybe the latter part of winter, early spring next year, because that stadium, I believe, is going to be ready for 2028, as was reported. So they have 3 years in order for them to get that stadium up and go in there out in the desert. But for Severino to leave, Clay Holmes, and then Montas, a former Yankee, I mean, George Steinbrenner has to be laughing in his grave somewhere. Because Steinbrenner, that's all he did, was try to pluck the old Mets from the 80s, the Strawberries, the Goodens, the Cones of the world. And now, for whatever reason, Steve Cohen is doing the same thing. Harrison Bader, guys like that. So, I don't know, Holmes, I did not like that signing. Nothing personal against Holmes. And we understand he had flashes as a reliever, but now he's going to be a starter? This is why I talked about a few minutes ago. Mets have a lot of work to do. Then you have Willy Adames, who signed a 7-year, $182 million deal with the Giants. So he goes from Milwaukee to San Francisco, who's been trying to get that big-time free agent, whether your name was Aaron Judge, whether your name was Carlos Correa. If you remember, they actually had him just about signed on the dotted line before that fizzled out. And then they made a couple of other signings here and there, the Matt Chapmans of the world. And I know they brought in the kid from Korea who got hurt halfway through the season. And now they're bringing Adames to see if he can infuse some life and some flair, even a little bit of swag to the Giants, as they need it in the worst way. So let's see what's going to happen with Adames there in the Bay Area. And one guy who went from the Bay Area, other than Blake Snell, down the I-5 to L.A. was one Michael Conforto, who signed a 1-year, $17 million deal. What's going to happen there with the Dodgers as they continue to just retool And we know what the moves that they made so far this offseason. Snell obviously was being one of them. So Conforto signs on a dotted line there with the Dodgers. Now, as far as the Hall of Fame, I just got to throw this in the mix before I move on to football. Dave Parker and Dick Allen, two guys who I saw Dave Parker play as a boy, even into a teenager as well. And he put up big numbers, was an MVP, two-time batting champ, and also won a World Series in 79. Played on those Pirate teams, of course, that won the World Series, the We Are Family team, beating the Orioles. Also with the Reds there in the mid-'80s, late 80s into the 90s, was with the A's and won a World Series in 89. And Dick Allen, who was an MVP in his own right in 72, I believe, for the White Sox, also played with the Phillies and was a slugger, I believe, before my time, but from what I've read and followed as a boy, a guy that if he stayed on the straight and narrow and was a guy that liked to go out, was a party animal, liked to drink, dearly departed, I might add. I believe he passed away within the last 5 years or so. But if it wasn't for what he did off the field, had the Hall of Fame talent, put up big-time numbers, over 300 home runs, and was a guy that had carried a big stick, elected to the Hall of Fame by the baseball, I believe it was the Era Committee, Classic Era Committee, which is headlined by guys like Paul Molitor, Eddie Murray, Lee Smith, Ozzie Smith, some executives, owners, and even historians for that matter, who follow the sport. Those two guys are going to be in. Parker, I know he's borderline, but he put up some big-time numbers there as a member of the Pirates as well as the Reds later on with Oakland, as I mentioned. And then Dick Allen, again, another guy that had Hall of Fame talent and was borderline as well, but they had selected him to be in the Hall of Fame. So congratulations to those guys, and posthumously for a one, Dick Allen. Now let me turn my attention to the NFL as I put on my helmet and shoulder pads, as well as college football. And the NFL, this is all I'm going to get into, people, because to me, when I take a look at the lay of the land, it is status quo. All right, the Bills lose in LA to the Rams, where Matthew Stafford put up big numbers and Josh Allen accounted for all 6 touchdowns. Think about that. 3 in the air, 3 on the ground. They had to come from behind, but they fell short. 44-42. And the Bills, who was riding a 7-game winning streak into the game last night against the Rams, end up losing, so they're now 10-3, and they fall 2 games behind the Kansas City Chiefs, who at the outset of this podcast, I talked about how, yes, the first takes of the world, and a lot of these shows want to start off with them, and they had to squeak by a Sunday night game against the Chargers, where the Chargers kicked the field goal there late, but then the Chiefs answered back in the closing seconds, where the field goal actually hit off the upright and went through. And that's how the Chiefs season has been, because they have been squeaking by these games and just really teetering on the brink of losing these games. But that's what happens when you're a champion, when you find a way. You have a quarterback, as we all know, is a winner, and a head coach that knows his way around this team and around winning as well. And when you're a 2-time defending champ and you win these games like this, you know that this is where you're going to build character. This is where you build know-how. This is where you have that DNA and that metal deep in the red and gold blood of that uniform, of that stadium and that organization. And what more can you say? I understand the story is, oh, can this keep on continuing? Oh, will this continue to last? I talked about this last week after they won the Raiders, and maybe even the week before that, how they got by Tampa on a Monday night, how Denver, I talked about this ad nauseum. So this isn't anything new, and there's no way I was going to start the podcast talking about that. Because again, status quo, NFL, and this is a part of it. But with the Bills losing and with Pittsburgh winning, beating the Browns yesterday, and even though they had a struggle there in the first half, but they were able to get in the second half after being down 7-3, they came back and scored 20 unanswered, 24 unanswered now that I think about it, because for a Steeler team that with Russell Wilson performing at a level that I certainly didn't expect, even after Justin Fields started off the year 4-2 and was good, but Russell Simmons, you hear me here, people? Russell Wilson is a guy that certainly has found a home. Who knows how much longer it's going to be after this year, but for right now, he's loving the locker room, he's loving the camaraderie, and it has certainly delivered here instead of Justin Fields, who was admirable, but certainly was not going to be a guy that was going to take this team to the next level, and that's what you've seen. All right, I understand it's against the Browns, can't get crazy, people, but now the Steelers have matched the Bills 10-3, but here's why. For those who are thinking, wait a minute, now they matched them, even though you look at the standings, the Bills still have the 2 seed in the conference. To me, twofold, how the Steelers are not going to get the 2 seed. One, that even if both teams run the table, the Bills are going to have the upper hand here because they'll have the same conference record. Everything will be as is, but Buffalo will have a 2 seed. The only way the Steelers could get the 2 seed is if they have a game better in the standings over the Bills. And even though the Bills play the Lions in a possible Super Bowl preview, but remember this, the Steelers play the Eagles in also quite possibly a Super Bowl preview this Sunday in the same time slot, 4:25. So even if both teams lose that game, the remainder of the way, the Steelers still have the Ravens on the road in Kansas City. I get it. They may not be the Chiefs of old, the dominant team, the team that's going to run you out of the stadium. But Buffalo, who do they have in their final 3 games after their game against Detroit? 2 games with New England, sandwiched by the Jets in between, where Pittsburgh has Baltimore, Kansas City, and then at home against Cincinnati. That's why the Steelers aren't going to get the 2 seed, because they're going to lose in these next 3 games. Forget about Cincinnati at the end. If they go 2-1, that's going to be good, but that's not going to be enough for them to get a 2 seed. So when they lose in Philly, and let's say beat Baltimore and then lose to Kansas City, or even if they beat Baltimore and Kansas City, still, we would think with New England and the Jets on the docket after that, there's no way that the Bills are going to fall behind the Steelers in the standings when it's all said and done. And even if that was the case, let's say if they were to be even, again, Bills have the upper hand, so that's why I think the Steelers are going to have a 2 seed, but they should be locked in as a 3, which will be big, because if they do beat the Ravens the second go-around, then they'll have everything locked up. Where, think about it, Steelers go to Philly, where they have not won in Philadelphia throughout their team's history. Look it up. And with Baltimore going to play the Giants, and the Giants are just, I'm not even going to talk about that Giant game against the Saints there yesterday, but the Giants are due to win at some point. I know they haven't won. They've lost how many in a row here? But Baltimore, you would figure after a bye, they're going to win at MetLife this coming Sunday. And if the Steelers lose in Philadelphia, they'll be a game behind going into that Saturday game in Baltimore the following week, which will be for the division when you think about it. But that's then, this is now. So the Steelers do have a 2-game lead in the division there. But other than that, the AFC is pretty much what it is. Y'all have Houston as the 4 seed in the conference, with the Chargers losing. The Ravens now the 5 seed because they had the tiebreaker. They beat them on a Monday night a couple weeks ago. Chargers are your 6 seed. Your 7 seed is Denver right now. And behind them, you have the Colts, 6 and 7. Now the Colts play the Broncos, I believe, in the coming weeks. I don't know if it's this coming week or next week. Let me take a quick peek there. Indianapolis is at Denver this week. That 4:25 window this week, and I'll talk more about the schedule on Thursday. Think about this. You have 4 o'clock, I'll say 4 o'clock games, but they're all 4:25. This coming week, forget about New England, Arizona, scratch that one out. Indianapolis at Denver, which Indy has to win. If they win, you can forget about it. I think the AFC is already wrapped up when it comes to the top 7 seeds, because Indianapolis is 2 games behind Denver right now. And if you want to throw in the Dolphins, even after their win against the Jets yesterday, they're tied with the Colts at 6 and 7. But think about it. Miami lost to Indianapolis earlier this year, so that cancels them out. So they're going to have to leapfrog them in order for them to have a shot at a fringe wildcard playoff berth. But Denver, Indianapolis, 425 there. Huge game. Buffalo, Detroit, Pittsburgh, and Philadelphia. You can't get a better 425 window than that. And that is this coming weekend. So that is your AFC. And in the NFC, you do have a little bit of a shift where the Falcons have plummeted. I don't know what's going to happen with Kirk Cousins. Another game which he was not well. And think about it. They came back from a deficit. It was 21-13. They tied the game. And as Sam Darnold scrambled around and had to find a receiver, and what a year Darnold has had, finds Justin Jefferson wide open to where they were able to take the lead and did not look back from there. And Kirk Cousins with another interception after that. And the game just fell apart from that point on, where the Falcons, who were 6-3 at one point and actually had them as an over. I believe their over-under was 7.5. And I said, oh yeah, that's going to be a lock. 8.5. And here they are at 6-7. And I'm going to have to run the table. And my over-under numbers are putrid right now. I could go 1-5, maybe even let me see. No, I already won one of mine, so I got to look at it that way. I may go 1-5 here for my over-unders, and maybe I'll save that for the end of the NFL segment. But the Falcons have just collapsed. And the Buccaneers, who, think about it, 6-3, the Buccaneers had to overtake the Falcons in order for them to have a playoff spot, because if they tied at the end of the year with the same record, and that could possibly happen, Atlanta swept Tampa in the regular season. So they would have to have that one-game lead when it's all said and done. But guess what? The Buccaneers have that one-game lead right now. They are 7-6. They came all the way back, and I believe they were 4-5 at that point, where they were 6-3. So technically they were 3 games behind. Forget about it. That got wiped out in a hurry. 4-game losing streak for the Falcons, 3-game winning streak for the Buccaneers. Bucks beating the Las Vegas Raiders yesterday, where Aiden O'Connell got knocked out of the game. So for Baker Mayfield and company, now they control their own destiny. First place in the NFC South. Great job by them. And I don't know if you're going to hear from the Falcons. I know their schedule isn't that bad. I believe they have the Raiders coming up on a Monday night forthcoming. They do have Carolina on the schedule and have another easy game on the docket as well. I believe they have to go to Green Bay, if I'm not mistaken. Let me pull up their schedule just to see. But the Falcons, just an awful job. Oh, they have the Giants, at Raiders, Giants at home, at Commanders and Panthers. So they could probably win 3 of those 4 games. Raiders, Giants, Panthers. I don't know about the Commanders on the road. That'll get to 9, which will get me past my over-under. But as far as them making the playoffs, right now you have to factor that the Buccaneers and the remainder of their schedule, I believe, is rather simple. Buccaneers have at the Chargers. All right, that's not going to be easy. At the Cowboys, who knows what's going to be left of them. Panthers and Saints. They should be able to win a division. Watch it come down to that final game. Anything can happen. You know the NFL is topsy-turvy. And then the last of the frontiers when it comes to developments are the Seattle Seahawks. And they were a team that was left for dead. 4-5. They lose to the Rams after losing the week before to the 49ers. And I said, forget about it. For what you can look at, Geno Smith, even the first-year coach Mike McDonald, the former Raven defensive coordinator, I thought, they're going to be done, especially with the ascent of the Arizona Cardinals to where they were 6-4. They had the division first place to themselves, a very good division record to boot. And then they lose to the Rams, and now they lose to the Seahawks there yesterday at home, to where they came flying out of the gate, pretty much in command throughout the course of the game. Kyler Murray, who I like, but he is so erratic. He's a guy that, similar to Jameis Winston, now he's better than Winston. I don't want to compare the two quarterbacks, but he's a guy that can keep you in the game, but also help out the other team as well. Keeps both teams in the game. And for Murray, that was a statement game for the Seahawks, because then they would have had first place to themselves if they would have won that game. Actually, they would have tied with the Seahawks if that was the case. And now you can pretty much forget about it, because they have no tiebreakers against them. They are 2 games behind the Seahawks as of right this very moment. and you forget about a wild card because similar to the AFC, the NFC standings are pretty much the same. Granted that the Buccaneers, with them having the division all to themselves, but unlike the AFC where the Broncos have a 2-game lead over the next team behind them in the conference, the Commanders have a 1-game lead over the Rams after their win yesterday against the Buffalo Bills. So they have to factor in the Rams here as part of a wild card equation. And let's see, with Sean McVay and a veteran quarterback, could that be enough to overcome and get themselves into that final playoff spot to a young quarterback in Jaden Daniels and a coach who knows his way around the league in a one Dan Quinn? But even with them winning last week and having a bye this week, can they regroup and push past these past 4 games and get into the playoffs as a 7 seed? That we'll have to wait and see, but it's going to be an interesting final few weeks between the Commanders and the Rams, because after that, Falcons, Cardinals, 49ers, I don't believe in them. And you have a huge game Thursday night, Rams at 49ers, and the Rams beat them earlier this year in LA. So to me, this is the Niners' last stand. They lose this game, to me, you could officially punch their ticket out of the postseason because they'll have 4 division losses in their back pocket. And on top of that, they still have to catch the Seahawks, where right now, let me see what their Seahawks have a better division record. Seahawks are 3-2 in the division. Right now, the Niners are 1-3. So if the Rams win the game, forget about it. The Niners are going to be toast in the division, and they're not going to win a division on top of that, because then they'll be 6-8, 2.5 games behind the Seahawks, as the Seahawks at 8-5. So that's where your playoff picture lies at this very moment. And the Rams have a tiebreaker over the Seahawks. Keep that in mind too, because they beat them in Seattle a couple weeks ago prior to this stretch where they won these games. Obviously beating the Jets, yesterday beating Arizona, beating the Niners in the process. So keep that race in mind, not only with the Rams fighting for a possible wild card berth in the bottom rung there, but I'm sure they have their sights set on the division, knowing that they have a tiebreaker over the Seahawks. And as long as they keep pace with them going into, and let's see where they play. They may play that final game of the year. In fact, they do. Seahawks at Rams, week 18. Let's see if that factors out. Now they have Packers and Vikings at home, the Seahawks, and then they go to Chicago and the Rams to close out the year. So they have a couple of tough games, even though it's in their building, forthcoming. And then they got to go to Chicago, which is going to be cold. And then the Rams in that final game, where the Rams, obviously a Thursday night game against the Niners. And then with a mini bye after that, they go to the Jets, host the Cardinals and Seahawks to close out their year. Fascinating, to say the least, there in the NFC West. And that's what I have there with the NFL. Nothing much really to unpack or really even to get into. Nothing as far as injuries. Let me just look this up real quick. No. Like I said, status quo other than Bills losing, and where does that factor in with the 2 seed in the AFC? They control their own destiny. Bucks now have complete control of the South, at least as of right now. They control their own destiny. And the same can be said for the Seahawks, although there's a bit of a logjam with the Rams, and who knows if the Niners. I think the Cardinals are dead. Terrible job by them over these last 3 weeks. And Jonathan Gannon, their head coach, has a lot to answer to here. And also, well wishes to Randy Moss, as he's going to take a break from his broadcasting duties to focus in on his health. I know he was on the dais there with some sunglasses. A lot of people thought maybe he had an eye issue, but he's a lot worse than that. So I have him in our prayers, and he's asked a lot of us prayer warriors to do the same. So thoughts, prayers go out to Randy and his family. So we will see what's going to go on there. And quickly with over-unders. You ready for this, people? Here are my overs. I picked 4 overs and 2 unders. And one of the 2, or both of these, I'll never pick again. And I was just doing this not necessarily as a reverse jinx, but I really thought in my heart that, with the schedule and that these teams were going to thrive, or in my case, not thrive. Yes, I chose the Steelers as an under. Can you believe that? 8.5 was their number. Because of their schedule and their quarterback situation was uncertain. I know they had Russell Wilson and Justin Fields at the beginning of the year, but still, I didn't know how Wilson was going to pan out. If Justin Fields was going to start, I certainly didn't know how that was going to play out as well. And here they are at 10-3. Although now we're going to really get to see how this Steelers team and what they're going to be made of here, because now they're going to go up against an 11-2 Eagle team. Ravens on the road, which is never going to be easy, although they've won there in recent years, and they won a lot of games in that building. And then Kansas City at home. Granted, we talked about Kansas City barely skating by these games in victory. So it's all in front of the Steelers. Let's see how they play. I think 2-1, I'll be satisfied with. If they're 1-2, kind of going to show me how this team is going to be come playoff time. As long as they win that Raven game, to me, that's all I care about. But I want them to win all of them, at least 2 of the 3, but we shall see with the Steelers. I picked them as an under, and I picked the Colts as an under, and they've actually hung in there. They're 6-7, 2 more wins. They're going to be an over that total number, and I picked them as an under. Atlanta, 8.5. Skating on thin ice for me there. Bears, 7.5, which looked good about 5-6 weeks ago. Not anymore. Tampa, 6.5. That's probably going to be my win, and maybe my only win when it's all said and done. And I actually picked, of all teams, the Cleveland Browns. Only because Deshaun Watson, I thought that, hey, Kevin Stefanski, he already had a year under his belt last year. They won 12 games last year with 4 different quarterbacks, and I thought Watson could be a guy that could step the team up, and their number was 7.5. I thought that was a joke, and I said, no way. They're going to probably win at least 9 games tops. Joke's on me, Jack. And that's your over-unders, and we'll talk about those at the end of the year and see where we lie, whether I'm at 1-5 or 2-4. Now let me turn my attention to college football, because it is set. The college football playoff, which will begin a week from this coming Friday, and I'll talk about the schedule. I won't talk about the matchups or predict anything. I won't talk college football until we get to next Thursday's podcast, although we have Army-Navy this Saturday, and Army-Navy obviously is a big deal. But for the college football regular season, now put to rest, and championship conference weekend put to rest, and it started off slow, but it certainly ended with a bang. I will say that. It started Friday with Boise State. They win the Mountain West. They punched their ticket as one of the top 4 seeds. And let's face it, they don't deserve to be a top 4 seed. I understand if you're going to win your conference, that's going to be the case. Same for Clemson. I'll talk about them in a minute. Clemson, which was out of the top 12. And because they won the ACC, of course, they're going to be thrusted to having a bye and one of the top 4 seeds, but they are not deserving of a top 4 seed. I get it. This is the first year of the college football playoff. They're going to have to tweak this as they go along. And understand you want to benefit and give the conference champions a bye because they deserve it. But in the grand scheme of things, when we look at the playoff puzzle, does Clemson deserve a bye over Penn State, let's say? Does Clemson deserve a bye over Ohio State, let's say? And I understand Ohio State didn't play in the Big Ten Conference. I understand. But Ohio State, even with their loss to Michigan, you're going to think if they play Clemson right now, even on a sandlot, they're going to destroy the Tigers. So college football has some work to do to see how they can maneuver that. Although they want to grant the conference champions a bye, they're going to have to scrap that at some point. Because there's no way that Clemson, now who knows? Clemson right now, where are they ranked? They are currently 3rd. Yeah, because it's Oregon, Georgia who catapulted themselves to 2, followed by Boise and Arizona. Wait, I got that wrong. I think I pulled up the wrong bracket here. My apologies, my good people. But for this to actually happen, here it is. Boise or Clemson does have a bye, but they do not have a home game. So even though they did win, I got that mixed up. My apologies, people. Let me rewind that there. So your top 4, Oregon, as we know, Georgia up to number 2, Boise, Mountain West, Arizona State wins the Big 12. And this is based, of course, I thought Clemson right away. My apologies, because a lot of people thought SMU would have been part of that top 4. Clemson's going to play Texas there as a 12 seed at Clemson, because there's no way they were 18. They weren't going to catapult themselves up to a top 4. So I wasted my breath on that. So my apologies, people. You know me, transparency and accountability is big when it comes to the podcast and not cheating my listeners, viewers, etc. So, one more time, people, as I take a deep breath. As far as this situation, Boise State, I'll start there, where you have Ashton Gentry, who had the 209 yards, 75-yard touchdown run in control as they beat Iowa State to punch their ticket into the college football playoff. And yes, one more time, they have a bye as a 3 seed overall. Then Saturday, that was Friday night. Saturday, that's when you had the multitude of games, starting off with the game against the Arizona and Iowa State. Arizona just ran roughshod over Iowa State. What more can you say? 45-19, where you had the running back there and a Cam Scatterboo had 170 yards rushing, accounted for 3 touchdowns, and they ran away and just blew the doors off of Iowa State. So that was a game that you could have turned your sets off rather quickly there. Also on the docket was Georgia and Texas. As you know, Georgia, crazy game there where Carson Beck got knocked out as he tried to throw a Hail Mary there at the end of the first half. Georgia, their offense, they couldn't muster up, forget about a first down. It seemed like they couldn't muster up an inch. You look like Carson Beck and company were going to be lost. Texas actually had the same blueprint that Georgia had in their game earlier in the year, where Texas was just suffocating defensively. But then once Beck went out of the game, you had a backup that no one ever heard of. And it was interesting because a lot of people wondered whether or not that this backup was going to be able to deliver and actually put forth some offense there. And the one, Gunnar Stockton, and he looked good, made some passes, crisp, and was certainly effective there in the second half as Texas was a bit on their heels. They took a 13-6 lead, actually tied the game Texas there, where Georgia had a fake punt on a 4th and 5, which was huge because in the fourth quarter, because they needed that to extend or break a tie to have a 16-13 lead. And even as Texas was marching down the field and looked like they had an opportunity to actually punch it in the end zone there late after a pass interference call, but they had to settle for a field goal there. And even though the Longhorns, who now go into overtime, and there you had a scenario coming off of the 8 overtime game against Georgia Tech, the Bulldogs that is, after Texas gets the field goal to make it 19-16, and where Georgia is now looking like they're heading for pay dirt, and Gunnar Stockton is going for a first down, and he gets walloped to where his head looks like it was about to get snapped out of his body. Helmet goes flying. No targeting penalty, although there was a personal foul. You had to bring in Carson Beck, who had his arm wrapped up in ice. And for Beck to come out, handing it off to Trevor Etienne, up the gut for a touchdown, 22-19. Georgia survives yet again. And you have to think about these wins that Georgia has had, whether it was against Georgia Tech, here in an SEC championship game. They're showing their mettle. They're showing their toughness. And Kirby Smart with a gutsy 4th down fake punt, knowing that he didn't want to punt the ball to have Texas go ahead with a touchdown, not knowing what you were going to get out of Gunnar Stockton, who did show some flashes there. But again, you don't want to put the pressure on that kid down 7 to where he's going to have to march the length of the field, or even, let's say, go 35, 40 yards to kick a field goal to extend the game and push it into overtime. So Georgia, I think they're going to, and we'll talk more about them pretty much in 2 weeks when they have their first playoff game later on in the month. But I can't tell you how impressed I have been with Georgia here throughout pretty much the whole season. Even with tough losses to Ole Miss, even with that game against Alabama when they came all the way back, down 30-7. That game in its own should show you the type of heart, the type of toughness that this team has, and they've shown that here over the last 2 weeks and pretty much the last half of the season, when they had to play Texas, when they had to play Ole Miss, where they had to play Tennessee, where they had to play all these games, a gauntlet of a schedule. And now they get a 2 seed and a much-deserved bye here in the postseason. And then you had Clemson and SMU, which was probably the best game out of all. And I understand people could argue the SEC championship. But for Clemson, and I thought this game was over pretty much after the opening series. SMU gets the second play of the game. They fumble the ball, and then 2 plays after that, Clemson punches it into the end zone. It's 7-0, and you're thinking, oh boy, SMU is probably going to be in over their heads on this game. 24-7 at the half, 31-14 deep into the third quarter, and you're thinking, there's no way, forget about it. And at that point, the one thing that you're thinking about is whether or not SMU is going to get a bid here. Because we talked about this on Thursday. If SMU is going to get blown out here, the committee is going to have to think long and hard on whether or not they deserve to be in the college football playoff. Well, what happened? They started chipping away. They get a touchdown. They get a field goal. They answer back. Yes, the Tigers then are now trying to flail as they were unable to do anything on offense. I guess you could credit the Mustang defense. You had a couple of 3-and-outs. I think Clemson lacks there, even as the Mustangs were chipping away at that lead. And then the next thing you know, they actually tie the game. And at that point, you're probably thinking to yourselves, this is going to go into overtime because, you had 16 seconds left. And there was no way that Clemson was going to be able to have enough time to set up a field goal, let alone a long one for that matter. But what happens? They tie the game. And as they kick off, they get the kick return 41 yards to the Clemson 45, which was enormous. Because if the special teams would have acted there to, let's say, if they would have stopped them at the 30, chances are you're looking at overtime there. But with the timeout, they were able to get the one big pass. Cade Klubnik, who had a good game, completes it to Antonio Williams, 17 yards. So now they set it up at the Mustang 38. 56-yard field goal attempt, and guess what? It's good. A crushing defeat to the Mustangs after they came all the way back, after they answered the bell, after they showed their own grit, their own toughness, and what happens? They end up losing the game. But they don't lose a bid because thanks to the committee, they felt by their performance was enough to warrant them a spot in the college football playoff, which means Alabama is out. And you know what? You can't argue. They lost 3 games in the year. I get it, SEC, tougher schedule, etc. But they did not make it to a conference game. SMU did. Yes, they looked bad for 2.5 quarters, but came roaring all the way back. And even though it took a 56-yard field goal to have them lose the game, but the committee said, SMU was good all year. I understand the conference, maybe not great, but here they are, and they're deserving to be in the playoff where they'll go up against Penn State. And kudos to what they've done. I mean, that was a valiant effort that only fell short thanks to the right leg of their kicker, Nolan Hauser. And lastly, quick with Oregon and Penn State. And I understand Penn State hung in there, and Penn State was tough. And yes, they had the ball down by a score late in the game. But on a 2nd and 1, Drew Allard throws a pick, and that was it. And to me, I would have been, I don't want to say nervous because I'm not an Oregon fan, but if they would have moved the ball and it was less than 2 minutes to go, but if they had possession deep in Duck territory to where, let's say it was 1st and goal, then I would have been a little bit nervous. But they still had to get the touchdown and the 2-point conversion in order for me to believe that Penn State was going to have an upset in them. Because, let's face it, Oregon was in control of this game. They had a 2-score game throughout pretty much the whole game. They were in control. Yes, Penn State chipped away. Yes, Penn State fought back. Yes, Penn State had a chance with time and the ball late in the game. But Aller threw an interception. And that's all you could say. On a 2nd and 1, you figure, hey, let's run another play there or a safe pass. And granted that the Nittany Lions, although a lot of people are going to think that, hey, obviously we're in the playoffs and they deserve to be there. But if people are going to think right now that Penn State, even in their loss to Oregon, is a team that to be reckoned with here in this playoff. Now, granted, they are going to go up against SMU. And like I said, next Thursday we'll break it all down. But I still got to see a little bit more from Penn State in order for me to believe that they're going to be a team to be reckoned with here when we start the playoffs next week. And to go through the schedule, here's what we got, people. Friday night, a week from this coming Friday, 8 p.m., ABC, ESPN. Indiana will be in South Bend, which is interesting because that's going to be obviously a home game for Notre Dame. But because same state, will there be a Hoosier contingent that will infiltrate South Bend? That we'll have to wait and see. I don't think that's going to be the case. You're going to have, of course, students and faculty, etc. But Indiana at ND next Friday, the standalone game. And then on Saturday, which is going to compete against the NFL, because remember, you have Kansas City and Houston, 1 o'clock, and then 4:30 Pittsburgh at Baltimore, which are going to be two big games, especially that 4:30 game. But high noon, SMU at Penn State on TNT, followed by Clemson at Texas, also on TNT at 4 o'clock. And then the primetime game is Tennessee at Ohio State. That's going to be a big game as well. ABC and ESPN. That is your college football playoff, which we'll get more into 10 days from now when we get set for the first ever 12-team college football playoff. All right, now let me turn my attention to a couple of things. Lacing the high tops for the NBA as well as the skates for the NHL. I'll start off with the NBA. I know you have the NBA Cup this week. You have the quarterfinals tomorrow. And Wednesday, you're not going to have the semifinals until Saturday. And then the championship the following Tuesday, which I don't like. Why they're spreading this out is beyond me. Listen, who am I to say that? But you want to try to get this thing over. Play Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, which I thought was the case last year, but I guess they want to spread it out this year. So that's what you have. And the games of note, for those who are interested, your quarterfinal games, Orlando, Milwaukee, Dallas, OKC tomorrow night. And then you have Atlanta, New York to play the Knicks, followed by Golden State, Houston. Obviously, the winners of those matchups will play on Saturday. And then in your semifinal, and then obviously your final will be next Tuesday. Some other notes, Chris Paul, CP3, now second all-time in assists, passing Jason Kidd as he did so last night. So congratulations to the future Hall of Famer. And then a couple of big injuries. Evan Mobley sprained his ankle in the game against Miami last night in a loss, I might add. Not to be lingering or anything long-term, I'm sure day-to-day. Not the case for one Brandon Ingram of the New Orleans Pelicans. Out indefinitely with an ankle sprain. To layer that with Zion Williamson's hamstring. A long season there for the Pelicans, as we know. And let's see what's going to happen with them, as I'm sure Willie Green could be, not to his fault, maybe could be walking the plank here. And undeservedly, because he's a good young NBA coaching mind, and it would be unfair he gets his walking papers. But as we all know, it's a what have you done for me lately business. And with the Pelicans now at 5-20 at the bottom of the Western Conference, who knows? Maybe his job is not going to be long in New Orleans. Now, the Wizards finally snapped that 17-game losing streak, beating the Denver Nuggets the other night, where Nikola Jokic scored 56, a career high, and then the last night against the Hawks only put up 40. What did he put up? 43, I believe, in a win in Atlanta. But for Washington, they snapped that streak, 17 in a row, and kudos to the Wizards, as they obviously are the worst team in the sport, if you could even think. Right here we are talking about New Orleans at 5-20, and they don't even have the worst record. So that distinction, unfortunately, goes to the Wizards. But the Sixers, break them up. They're starting to win a few games here. Embiid was back in the lineup last night as they beat the Bulls. And even though he's been frustrated and even depressed with his knee issues, but now at 7-15, trying to get themselves on track and a long NBA season. Remember, this team was what? I believe at one point they were 3-13. And now as they're trying to, they're still not playing well by any means. But for them, maybe this is a time for them to get themselves right, as Tyrese Maxey is back as well as Paul George. So we'll just keep that in mind, as they're still way back in the Eastern Conference. And the Heat have played well here, winners of 3 in a row. Beat the Lakers there the other day, and then they also beat the Suns. And they followed that up there yesterday with a win over the Cavaliers. Celtics lose to the Grizzlies the other night. This was after them beating the Bucks on Friday in an emotional game where Jaylen Brown mocked Giannis Antetokounmpo. If you remember, Giannis with the fake handshake there a few weeks ago. So he paid him back there, and then they had to fight tooth and nail down the stretch to win that game. And then the following night, Memphis comes into town, and Memphis was able to take advantage of a tired Celtic team. No excuses, but Memphis was able to get the win in Beantown. And yes, with the NBA Cup on the horizon, Dallas, who is going to play that game against OKC, they've won now 7 in a row, and they're playing well, as good as anybody in the sport. Tied with the Rockets, who have also played well, and Udoka, who had the fines levied against him, where he was getting at the refs, cursing them out. I don't know what his fine, $50,000, whatever it was, as the Rockets still playing well. Memphis 17-8, having a big year. OKC doing what they did, picked up from last year as a 1 seed in the West. And that's what you pretty much have there with the NBA. Let's see what the schedule is early on this week. Anything of note to discuss besides the 2 games? No, as a matter of fact, you have the Knicks in Toronto tonight. I guess a tune-up for them. But the next 2 nights, it's going to be all about the NBA Cups, which we'll obviously focus our attention to on Thursday's podcast. As far as the NHL goes, as I lace up my skates, the Rangers, a team that has been flailing here. They have really underachieved here in this early part of the season. And although they actually got off to a pretty good start, but now there's been a bit of a shakeup there as they traded Jacob Trouba, their captain of the last 3 years and has been a Ranger for the last 5. And Trouba, the organization went to him even in the offseason, thoughts about trading him, even Chris Kreider. And I understand Kreider's been on the team now for 12 years and has had a good start to his year. I believe he has 9 goals on the team. But for Trouba, where it looked like he was going to be, I don't want to say a cap casualty, but a guy who's making a lot of money and a guy that the Rangers had pretty much given him an ultimatum. And Trouba in his press conference with the Anaheim media or the LA media, whatever you want to call it, yes, he felt as if he was being forced out of New York because he has a no-trade contract to 15 teams in the sport. And the Rangers had pretty much said, hey, we're going to trade you, or we're just going to put you on waivers, to where he would have to lose that no-trade scenario and he could be picked up by any of these teams out there. Well, he did get traded to Anaheim, a team. I was trying to say Anaheim and team in the same breath. My apologies there. Goes to Anaheim. Gets traded for a guy who hasn't really played that much in his own right, a one Urho Vakanainen. Let me pronounce that 5 times. I believe he's a Finn. And for the Rangers, as they try to snap out of these doldrums, they did win Friday against the Penguins. That's where they held out Trouba out of the lineup. And then they lose to the Kraken yesterday, where they get out to a 3-1 lead. The Kraken score 5 unanswered goals to take a 6-3 lead. Then the Rangers chip away, make it 6-5 before the Kraken added an empty netter to close out a 7-5 victory at MSG yesterday afternoon. So the Rangers, who are trying to find their way here post-holiday Thanksgiving break, what is their record here? Now, I know they're tied with the Islanders. That's all you need to know in the conference. Granted that they have 3 games in hand against the Islanders, but they are 3-7-0 in their last 10. A team that certainly has really hit an abutment here. I know Mika Zibanejad, even Kreider for that matter, with his 9 goals, they've underachieved. And this is a team that is trying to see plenty of time to go, obviously, but certainly trying to shake things up as they make their way up the Metropolitan Division, where the Capitals have 40 points and lead the division by 2 points over the Devils, 3 or 5 over the Hurricanes, where the Islanders beat the Hurricanes over the weekend. And even with that shakeup, they signed Igor Shesterkin, their goaltender, to a 8-year deal, $92 million, average annual value $11 million a year, which is the biggest contract per year for a goalie in NHL history. Because people right away are going to think back to Rick DiPietro when he signed that 15-year deal. Remember that, Islander fans? But that was for $67 million. So obviously, yes, the length of it was the longest, but certainly not by the annual average value. That goes to Shesterkin. And now, speaking of which, coming full circle, spotlight on Juan Soto and what he signed, and now the same for Shesterkin. Because as one of the top goaltenders in the sport, and a team that has made the conference finals the last 2 years, he's going to have to take his team to the next step. And granted that the Rangers are talented, the Rangers have a lot of big-time pieces on their team, but we all know if your goaltender is not going to stand on his head and deliver you a couple of games, especially as you get deep into the postseason, then that $11 million payday, not to say it's going to be for naught, but a lot of people are going to think, with the pressure, the contract, etc., I get it, the NHL is not the NFL or the Major League Baseball for that matter, or even the NBA. But a lot of pressure is going to be put on Shesterkin to deliver here and bring his team to a Stanley Cup and win it. So just keep that in mind for the Broadway Blue Shirts one more time as they try to maneuver here in this Eastern Conference. And then Luke Richardson, the Blackhawk coach, was fired there Thursday after the podcast was recorded. Former player, most notably for the Toronto Maple Leafs back in the 80s and 90s. 3 years, I mean, what could you say? His record was 57, 118, and whatever the ties were. Can you fault Richardson? Absolutely not, but they had to make a change. They bring up Andrew Sorensen from the AHL team as he was promoted as an interim, and he lost his first game there yesterday. So the Blackhawks, even with Connor Bedard, even with the young number one pick overall last year, a generational player, let's see if that's going to be the case. But the Blackhawks decided to make a pivot, and they did so by firing Richardson. As far as overall, there isn't really anything else. I know the Bruins have played well after they changed their coach. They've won 4 in a row here, as they're now 3 points behind the Panthers in the Atlantic, 1 point behind the Maple Leafs in the division. Sabres, who have played pretty well and are looking to make a playoff for the first time forever, they've now lost 6 in a row. Same for the Red Wings, 5 in a row, so both of those teams floundering there. Other than that, what else can I discuss? Kings have won 5 in a row, played well. Nashville, I have them as an over this year. They've lost 7 in a row. Oh, God, me and my over-unders. Ugh, just putrid. Besides that, NHL is stable. Nothing else to really report, nothing else to really get into. Let's take a look at their schedule this week before I bid adieu. Schedule-wise tonight, speaking of which, you have the Blackhawks in the Garden tonight. Blackhawks will be as what? Wait a minute, is that right? Yeah, Blackhawks in the Garden. As my calendar or my page was refreshing, it had it for tonight and tomorrow, but I know the Blackhawks aren't playing the Rangers tonight and tomorrow at the Garden. Tonight in the Garden, Blackhawks, you like those original 6 matchups. So we'll see that there. Speaking of Detroit and Buffalo, who are both in long losing streaks, they play each other in Buffalo tonight. Toronto playing in New Jersey tomorrow. Kings playing the Islanders, as the Kings will be in town over the next few days because they will play the Devils on Thursday and then I guess the Rangers on Saturday, yes, afternoon. Kind of like Seattle did here over the past week. Wednesday, only 2 games on the schedule. Rangers in Buffalo, Anaheim, Ottawa. Yeah, nothing big. Florida at Seattle. Maybe that game there. Minnesota at Utah. Tampa at Edmonton. Boston at Winnipeg there tomorrow. Those are your matchups there for the NHL here in the early part of the week. We'll talk more about the schedule there on Thursday. And that will do it. Another episode in the books, people. Thank you so much for stopping by, passing by, to carve out precious time out of your day to listen to what it is they have to say about what goes on in the wonderful world of sports. If you haven't done so, please subscribe, rate, and review. Say that one more time, J Reels. Please subscribe, rate, review on whichever podcast platform that you listen to. Apple, Spotify. Of course, the YouTube channel at J Reels, which I post daily, as well as the podcast, or whichever podcast platform that you listen to. That's going to go a long way to increase the visibility of this podcast to those who aren't familiar with it. And also, if you have a question, comment, or suggestion, you can do so at the following. Send it to whether the YouTube channel at J Reels, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, the J Reels Podcast, or Twitter, J Reels1, just the number, the old-fashioned way, the J Reels Podcast at gmail.com. I'll be more than happy to follow up with you guys and gals, because whether you do or do not know, this is what I love to do, people. If you couldn't tell from the outset and throughout the hour and whatever it's been, 17, 18 minutes of this podcast, shame on you. Then you're going to have to come back to the podcast on Thursday to listen to more. Share with your family, friends, foes, frenemies. Take a screenshot on socials. Send it to whomever, to the casual, diehard, good, great, so-so sports fan in your lives. Because I'm going nowhere, people. As long as I'm alive and breathing, independent content creator, trying to carve a path and a trail here in this business, trying to earn an income. That's why I need your help, people. Because I will always deliver, sitting in front of this microphone and camera, nothing but fire, passion, fury, energy, with my thoughts, opinions, critiques, praise, analysis, feelings on anything and everything that happens on the world of the diamond, ice, gridiron, hardwood, golf course, racetrack, tennis court, boxing ring, octagon, you name it. From my lips to your ears, from my heart to your soul, from where I am to wherever you are, the J Reels podcast always comes correct, direct, and in full effect. From the South Bronx, the South Beach, the South Central, the South Pacific, and all points beyond, peace, love, and God bless everybody. And until next time on the J Reels podcast, on the flip, baby.